Friends, hello. This is the first episode of our big series about World War II. We prepared it for months, and we're still working on it. This is a story about the hardest, bloodiest, most terrible war in human history. According to different estimates, it took from 55 to 75 million lives across the world. Almost every region was involved: Europe, Africa, the Pacific, and Asia. Battles happened everywhere. While preparing, we used archives, books, diaries, and most important, newspapers of that time. In newspapers, you can find a lot of details people have forgotten. In these episodes, we'll cover all theaters of war: the Eastern and Western fronts, the Pacific, and Africa. Year by year, month by month. Before we start, one small thing. Our audience has grown a lot, and many people watch without subscribing. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss new episodes. There will be more of them now. World War II began at 4:26 a.m. on September 1st, when a Luftwaffe dive bomber, Junkers 87, flown by Bruno Deli, made the first attack on Polish targets. This is the official line in history books, but in a way, the war began with the phrase, "Grandma has died." Where did that phrase come from? Let's touch the lead-up to the war. We talked more in our episode about the Munich Agreement. Watch it if you haven't. In short, the deeper reasons were similar to World War I. Germany had been pushed out of the colonial race. It needed markets, raw materials, and colonies. It asked the Western powers to share. They didn't, and World War I began. Germany lost badly. The Versailles system put huge reparations on Germany. Even its authors said, generations of Germans won't be able to pay this off. Germany got demilitarized zones and strict limits on the army and navy. After WWWI, two empires fell: Austria, Hungary, and the Russian Empire. New states appeared. The Baltics and Finland became independent. Poland became independent. Hungary appeared. The Balkans map was redrawn. For Germans, Versailles felt like national humiliation: moral, political, and economic. Germany wanted revenge. Hitler, who came to power, felt these moods very well. He built a militarized state. Its goals: return lost lands and become the main power in Western Europe. Of course, France and Britain opposed him. The USSR was also there. Complicated. There's a common question. Why didn't the USSR, Britain, France, and the USA unite early and crush Hitler at the start, after the Anschluss of Austria, or after he took Czechoslovakia, or at least after the attack on Poland? Because there were no real allies then. Britain and France often saw Stalin's USSR as just as dangerous as Hitler's Germany. They even planned military actions against the USSR. The USSR also moved to expand, signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler, and then returning former imperial lands. The USA didn't want to get involved. It expected a war with Japan and got it later. So no united front existed. Britain and France had some alignment, but they had already betrayed Czechoslovakia at Munich. Poland's situation was also not simple. It had cooperated with Germany earlier and got the Teschen area when Czechoslovakia was partitioned. Poland felt confident for a while. A key dispute was the Polish Corridor. Look at the map. East Prussia was split from the rest of Germany by Polish land. In between was the free city of Danzig, now Gdansk. This made daily issues: transit, payments, and the status of the German population there. Germany proposed, "Give us the corridor to connect our lands. In return, we support your expansion to the East Ukrainian lands when we fight the USSR. You dreamed of a greater Poland, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Here's your chance." Poland refused. It didn't mind gains in the East, but didn't want to give up the corridor. By early 1939, Hitler already knew there would be war. He only needed a pretext. German propaganda started talking about Polish provocations. Poland denied them. Its army was weaker, and it didn't want war. The pretext would be created by Germany itself. The plan for the pretext was called Operation Himmler. One of its parts became known as the Gleiwitz incident. The idea: stage several Polish attacks to show proof to the world photos, bodies, bullet holes, and say, "Poland attacked us. We must defend ourselves." The sub-operation had a code name: Canned Goods. Reinhard Heydrich, head of the RSHA, proposed this. There was a German radio station near the border in the town of Gleiwitz. SS men would put on Polish uniforms, seize the station, fire shots, and broadcast in Polish. "We, Greater Poland, are starting an invasion of Germany." They needed Polish-speaking voices, so they used Volksdeutsche ethnic Germans from Poland. But they also needed corpses to show on camera. They didn't want to kill their own. So they took prisoners already sentenced to death, injected them, dressed some as Poles, some as Germans, and laid them out as if after a firefight. Grim and cynical, but that was the plan. The field lead on the operation was Alfred Naujoks, a Heydrich subordinate. He sat in a hotel waiting for the signal phrase by phone: "Grandma has died." On August 31st, he got the call. The team moved in, staged the attack, made the broadcast, arranged the bodies, and sent the message the Nazi leadership wanted. Poland attacked first. Hitler then addressed the nation. "We are going on a Polish campaign to defend our borders." He did not say war yet. The real plan was to crush Poland fast. Berlin believed Britain and France wouldn't fight for Poland, just like they abandoned Czechoslovakia. After a quick victory, Germany would offer a peace conference, keep what it took, and move on. At 4:26 a.m., September 1st, the Luftwaffe made the first strike. At 4:45 a.m., in the free city of Danzig, the old German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, which had entered on a friendly visit a week earlier, opened fire on Polish positions at Westerplatte. The first air duel happened the same day. Luftwaffe pilot Frank Neubert shot down a Polish fighter. Germany's plan was classic blitz: armored wedges, fast movement, break the front, encircle. In 2 weeks, Polish forces were collapsing. By September 5th, Poland moved its government and gold reserve from Warsaw to Lublin. German armies 3 and 4 were already surrounding Polish forces. On September 6th, the Germans took Krakow. What did Britain and France do after declaring war on September 3rd? This period became known as the Phony War, or Strange War. The French army did step into the Rhine area and took 12 German villages. It looked like a start of a real two-front war for Germany. But then the French stopped. The German Siegfried Line was strong. The French command chose to sit in fortified positions, expecting a long trench war like WWWI. It was a fatal misread. German mobile warfare would later tear through France. By September 12th, surrounded Polish armies began to surrender. German forces reached the outskirts of Warsaw and Lwów, then Poland. German tanks reached Brest, Barzyszcz on the 14th. Warsaw was encircled. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Soviet side and the German ambassador von Schulenburg discussed how to act under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and its secret protocols. On September 17th, the Red Army crossed into eastern Poland, with Molotov saying on radio, the Polish state had collapsed, and the USSR must protect Belarusians and Ukrainians there and bring them home. The same day, the USSR and Japan signed a truce, ending the border clashes, Khalkhin Gol, since Tokyo wasn't ready for a big land war with the USSR. On September 18th, Soviet troops entered Vilna, then Polish, later given to Lithuania. German and Soviet forces met near Brest-Litovsk and even held a joint parade on September 22nd, a show that the new border was agreed and Poland was finished. Inside Warsaw, German forces issued a 12-hour ultimatum to surrender. The Poles refused. Bombing intensified. On September 28th, Warsaw fell. On October 8th, Hitler signed a decree. Poland would no longer exist. Instead, the general government was created, headed by Hans Frank, a brutal ruler, who would build ghettos and drown the land in blood. At the same time, the USSR pushed base agreements on the Baltics. Estonia signed first, a trade treaty, plus a Soviet base, and a limited garrison of 25,000 men. Lithuania soon followed, with Vilnius as a gift. Talks began with Finland too, but the Finns refused Soviet demands to move the border away from Leningrad and give up key islands and the Hanko Peninsula in exchange for bigger but less strategic lands in Karelia. This dispute would lead to the Winter War. Back in the West, the British and French mostly sat and flew leaflet drops over Germany, trying propaganda. It had no effect. Germany was celebrating victory in Poland. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy suffered shocks. On October 14th, German submarine U-47 slipped into Scapa Flow and sank the battleship Royal Oak, killing 800. It was a sign WWI habits would not save Britain now. By late September through October, Germany was already moving forces west for the next phase. Hitler ordered planning for Case Yellow, the attack on France through the Low Countries. While the German army moved fast, in just a few days, it broke through Polish defenses on several fronts. The Polish command expected a long defensive war and hoped that Britain and France would strike Germany from the west. But no help came. The Polish army was left to fight alone. German armored divisions advanced quickly toward Warsaw. The sky over Poland was full of German aircraft. Bombs fell on roads, railways, and cities. The Luftwaffe attacked civilian targets to break morale. Refugees filled the roads. Cars, horse carts, and people on foot mixed with military columns. It became impossible for Polish units to regroup or counterattack. German tanks surrounded large parts of the Polish army near Radom, Kutno, and Lodz. On September 6th, the German army captured Kraków. 2 days later, German troops were already 40 kilometers from Warsaw. Polish forces tried to organize defense lines on the Vistula River, but the speed of the German advance made it impossible. By September 10th, it was clear. Poland could not win alone. The government and president fled to Lublin, then to Romania. They took the country's gold reserve with them. German armies were closing in from the north, west, and south, and from the east came another army. At dawn on September 17, 1939, Soviet troops crossed the eastern border of Poland. Moscow explained this move as a mission to protect Ukrainians and Belarusians, because they said the Polish state had collapsed. But in fact, it was part of the secret deal between Germany and the USSR, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Red Army met almost no resistance. Polish units were already surrounded and broken by the Germans. In some places, local skirmishes happened, but the Polish commanders had orders to avoid conflict with Soviet troops. In Vilnius, Grodno, Brest, and Lwów, Soviet and German forces even held joint parades. The most famous was in Brest on September 22nd, where German General Guderian and Soviet General Krivoshein saluted each other. Polish soldiers who tried to flee to Romania or Hungary were interned. About 200,000 of them managed to escape and later joined the Polish army in exile, which would fight on the Western Front and in Africa. On September 28th, Warsaw fell. The city was completely destroyed by bombs and artillery. Thousands of civilians were killed. The defense of Warsaw became one of the first heroic stories of the war. The Polish capital resisted 20 days longer than anyone expected. On October 2nd, the last Polish stronghold on the Baltic, Hel Peninsula, surrendered. The campaign was over. Hitler issued a decree. Poland no longer existed. Most of its territory became the general government under Nazi rule. Its head was Hans Frank, a lawyer and fanatical Nazi. He would later be executed in Nuremberg for crimes against humanity. The German occupation of Poland was extremely brutal. Mass executions, deportations, and the destruction of Polish culture began immediately. Jews were forced into ghettos, universities were closed. Thousands of teachers, priests, and officers were killed. In the East, the USSR began its own Sovietization. New administrations were created, land was taken from owners, and elections were staged to join these lands to the USSR. By November, Western Ukraine and Western Belarus officially became part of the Soviet Union. The border between Germany and the USSR was now drawn roughly along the Bug River. The new friends started trading and even exchanging materials. Soviet ships delivered oil, grain, and metals to Germany. In return, Germany sent machines, weapons, and technology. Both sides still prepared for future wars, just not with each other yet. While Poland burned, the Western Front stayed quiet. France and Britain had declared war on September 3rd, but for 8 long months, they barely moved. This period became known as the Phony War, a war without real fighting. French soldiers sat in their bunkers on the Maginot Line. They played cards, wrote letters home, and listened to the radio. British soldiers arrived in France but did nothing. Newspapers called it the calm before the storm. German soldiers on the other side did the same, waiting. The German plan was simple: secure the east, then strike west. Hitler met with his generals and ordered preparations for an attack through Belgium and the Netherlands, the same route used in World War I, but with tanks and planes this time. Meanwhile, Germany and the USSR officially confirmed their friendship. Foreign ministers Ribbentrop and Molotov signed new trade agreements, but behind the smiles were maps. Secret maps dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The USSR took its share quickly. In October 1939, Soviet diplomats invited the leaders of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to Moscow. They were forced to sign mutual assistance pacts, allowing the USSR to place tens of thousands of troops on their territory. A few weeks later, Lithuania received Vilnius as a gift taken from Poland. But it was not a gift. It was the first step toward occupation. Next came Finland. The Soviet government demanded that Finland move its border away from Leningrad and give several islands and a naval base at Hanko. In exchange, the USSR offered twice as much land elsewhere, but it was poor, forested land. The Finns refused. The Soviet-Finnish War began on November 30th, 1939. At dawn, the Red Army crossed the border. Moscow called it a defensive operation, but the world understood it was an invasion. Finland was a small country with only 3.5 million people. The Red Army had almost 1 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, and aircraft. But the Finns were fighting on their own land. They knew the forests, the lakes, and the snow. The Soviet leadership expected a quick victory. They thought Finland would collapse in 2 weeks, but the Finns resisted fiercely. They built a powerful defensive line, the Mannerheim Line, on the Karelian Isthmus. They used skis to move silently in the forests. They wore white camouflage, attacked at night, and destroyed Soviet tanks with simple gasoline bombs, later called Molotov cocktails, after Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov. In December and January, the Red Army suffered terrible losses. Entire divisions froze in the forests. Supplies were cut off. Morale was low. Stalin was furious. He replaced several generals, and finally, under Marshal Timoshenko, the Soviet army reorganized and broke the Mannerheim Line in February 1940. Finland asked for peace. The war ended on March 12, 1940. Under the peace treaty, Finland lost 11% of its territory, including Karelia, Vyborg, and the Hunko base. But it stayed independent and kept its government, army, and democracy. The Soviet Union paid a heavy price. Over 120,000 soldiers were killed or missing. The world saw that the Red Army was strong in numbers, but weak in leadership and coordination. After the Winter War, the USSR continued to expand its control over the Baltics. By the summer of 1940, Soviet troops entered Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. New people's governments were created. Then, under popular request, all three republics were added to the Soviet Union. At the same time, the USSR forced Romania to hand over Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. By August 1940, the Soviet borders had moved far west. In the west, nothing moved for months. But Hitler was ready. His next goal was France. He planned to strike through Belgium and the Netherlands, where the Allied defenses were weaker. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered in 6 hours. Norway resisted longer, but German paratroopers and the Navy secured Oslo and major ports. The Allies tried to help, sending British and French troops, but the campaign failed. By June, Norway was fully under German control. King Haakon fled to Britain. With Scandinavia secured, Hitler turned to France. On May 10, 1940, the German army launched Fall Gelb, Case Yellow. It was a massive surprise attack through Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Ardennes forest. The Allies expected the main strike in northern Belgium, but the real German thrust came through the Ardennes, a place they thought tanks couldn't pass. They were wrong. German panzer divisions moved fast. They crossed the Meuse River near Sedan and raced toward the English Channel. In just 10 days, they surrounded the British Expeditionary Force and part of the French army near Dunkirk. The Allies were trapped. Operation Dynamo began, a desperate evacuation across the Channel. From May 26 to June 4th, more than 330,000 soldiers were rescued. It was a miracle, but all their heavy equipment was left behind. After Dunkirk, France was collapsing. German troops entered Paris on June 14th. The French government fled to Bordeaux. On June 22nd, France signed an armistice with Germany. Half the country was occupied. The other half, with its capital in Vichy, became a puppet state under Marshal Philippe Pétain. The French fleet and colonies were ordered to cooperate with Germany. General Charles de Gaulle escaped to London and declared that the fight was not over. In just 6 weeks, Hitler had defeated one of the strongest armies in the world. All of Western Europe was now under his control, from Norway to the Pyrenees. Only Britain stood alone. Hitler hoped that Britain would ask for peace. He even sent secret messages through neutral countries. But Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister in May 1940, refused. His answer was clear: "We shall never surrender." Germany prepared Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. But before landing troops, they needed control of the air. So began the Battle of Britain, the first major air battle in history. In July 1940, the Luftwaffe started bombing British airfields, radar stations, and cities. At first, they targeted the Royal Air Force. But after a British raid on Berlin, Hitler ordered revenge, massive bombings of London and other cities. This became known as the Blitz. Night after night, German planes dropped thousands of bombs. London burned, but the British did not break. Civilians slept in the underground. Firefighters and volunteers saved what they could. The RAF fought bravely. British pilots and volunteers from Poland, Canada, and Czechoslovakia shot down hundreds of German planes. By October, the Luftwaffe had lost more aircraft than it could replace. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion. Britain had survived. It was his first defeat. Churchill said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." After the fall of France, Hitler was at the height of his power. Almost all of Europe was under German control. Only Britain continued to fight. But Hitler had another target in mind: the Soviet Union. Despite the Pact of Friendship signed in 1939, Hitler never trusted Stalin. In his book, Mein Kampf, he had already written that Germany needed Lebensraum, living space in the East. By late 1940, plans for the invasion of the USSR were already being prepared. The operation was given the name Barbarossa, after the medieval emperor Frederick Barbarossa. Hitler believed that the Soviet Union was weak. He thought the Red Army had been destroyed by Stalin's purges and that the country would fall in a few weeks. His generals warned him that the war would be long and hard, but he ignored them. On June 22, 1941, without a declaration of war, Germany and its allies, Romania, Hungary, Finland, and Italy, attacked the Soviet Union along a front more than 2,900 kilometers long. It was the largest military invasion in history. At 3:15 in the morning, the first shells hit Soviet positions. Soon after, German bombers attacked airfields, railways, and cities. The Red Army was completely taken by surprise. Most Soviet planes were destroyed on the ground. Entire units were surrounded in the first days. Hitler divided his forces into 3 army groups. Army Group North moved toward Leningrad, Army Group Center toward Moscow, and Army Group South toward Ukraine and the Caucasus. The German advance was lightning fast. In just 3 weeks, they had pushed hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory. By July, they had taken Minsk and Smolensk, capturing hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. In the south, they surrounded the city of Kiev, where nearly 600,000 Soviet troops were trapped and captured. The world watched in shock. Hitler's army seemed unstoppable, but the Soviet Union did not collapse. Despite the chaos, Soviet industry began to move east, to the Urals, Siberia, and Central Asia. Thousands of factories were dismantled, loaded on trains, and rebuilt far from the front. Within months, they started producing tanks, planes, and ammunition again. The Soviet government called for total resistance. The radio repeated, "Everything for the front, everything for victory." Millions of men were drafted into the Red Army. Women worked in factories, hospitals, and on farms. Partisan groups began fighting behind enemy lines. By October 1941, German troops were only 30 kilometers from Moscow. The Soviet capital prepared for street battles. The government was evacuated to Kuibyshev, but Stalin stayed in the city. On November 7th, he held a military parade on Red Square, right as German artillery could be heard in the distance. The soldiers who marched that day went straight to the front. Winter came early that year. German troops were not ready for the freezing cold. Engines stopped working, weapons jammed, and soldiers suffered frostbite. At the same time, Soviet reinforcements arrived from Siberia, fresh troops trained for winter fighting. On December 5th, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack. German forces were pushed back from Moscow by 150 kilometers. It was the first major defeat of Hitler's army. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht was broken. After the failure near Moscow, Hitler dismissed several generals and took personal control of the army. He ordered a new offensive in 1942, this time toward the south, to capture the oil fields of the Caucasus and the city of Stalingrad. In the summer of 1942, German troops advanced deep into southern Russia. They reached the Volga River and began the battle for Stalingrad in August. It was one of the bloodiest battles in history. The city was bombed to ruins. Street by street, house by house, soldiers fought with rifles, grenades, and even knives. The Soviet defense was led by General Chuikov. His order was simple: not one step back. By November, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack, Operation Uranus. They surrounded the entire German Sixth Army inside the city. Hitler refused to let them retreat. He promised that they would be supplied by air, but the airlift failed. In February 1943, the Sixth Army surrendered. More than 90,000 German soldiers went into captivity. It was a crushing defeat. After Stalingrad, the war's momentum changed. Germany began to retreat, and the Soviet Union started its long road west. After Stalingrad, the Red Army no longer retreated. Every month, it pushed the Germans farther west. New Soviet tanks, T-34s, rolled out of factories by the thousands. Fresh divisions came from Siberia and Central Asia. The German army was exhausted. In the summer of 1943, Germany tried one last big attack, the Battle of Kursk. It became the largest tank battle in history. More than 6,000 tanks fought on both sides. After 2 weeks of brutal combat, the German offensive collapsed. From that moment, the initiative was lost forever. The Red Army went on the offensive everywhere. By early 1944, it had liberated most of Ukraine and Belarus. By the summer, Soviet troops reached the borders of Poland. Meanwhile, the Western Allies landed in Normandy, the famous D-Day. Germany now fought on two fronts. The end was coming. In January 1945, the Soviet Army launched its final great offensive, the Vistula-Oder operation. In just 3 weeks, they advanced over 500 kilometers, capturing Warsaw and reaching the outskirts of Berlin. The German capital was surrounded. Inside the city, there was chaos. Civilians hid in basements. Buildings burned. Hitler refused to leave his bunker. He still believed in a miracle that would never come. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet troops stormed the Reichstag, Hitler shot himself. 2 days later, Berlin fell. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The victory came at a terrible price. More than 60 million people died in the Second World War. The Soviet Union lost at least 27 million, soldiers and civilians. Entire cities were destroyed. Villages were burned. Millions were left homeless. Europe was divided. The West was controlled by the Allies. The East was controlled by the Soviet Union. A new confrontation began, the Cold War. The United Nations was created to prevent another global conflict. New borders were drawn. Old empires collapsed. Germany was divided into East and West. Millions of refugees moved across the continent. The war had changed everything: politics, science, and even human conscience. It showed both the worst and the best of humanity: cruelty, courage, and sacrifice. From 1939 to 1945, the world went through 6 years of horror. Cities turned to ash. Nations disappeared. But in the end, the Allied powers stood victorious. The Nazi regime was gone, and the world had learned how dangerous totalitarian power could be. The memory of those who fought and died still lives in every monument, every name carved in stone, and every story told. The Second World War ended in 1945, but its lessons remain forever.